And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winick. I am the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and thank you for joining us today on our podcast, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Tom Koulopoulos. Tom is one of the industry's leading futurists. He's the author of 10 books, including The Gen Z Effect, Cloud Surfing, The Innovation Zone, and The Corporate Instinct. He is the founder of Delphi Group, which is a 25-year-old Boston-based think tank. He's a columnist for Inc. He is an adjunct professor at BU. Let's see, what else do we have here? One of the most influential industry consultants by Information Week. Clearly, he is a profile guest that we have on our show. He's an author. He's a thought leader. He's a speaker. I've had the privilege of meeting Tom several years ago at a authors event, and here we are. Welcome, Tom. Thank you for joining us today.
Peter, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So we'll make this real easy and real quick. You're the futurist. The focus of content here is leveraging and scaling and the business side of thought leadership. What's the future of thought leadership? What's the future of content? In 30 seconds or less. I'm kidding.
Yeah, in 30 seconds or less, indeed. Hey, look, let me give you the nutshell, though, because I think you can sort of compress this. When I look back to how I built Delphi Group back in the late 80s and early 90s, and even going into the late 90s, the amount of effort it took to build a business, to attract people, to retain talent, to put in place the equipment and the resources was extraordinary. And I think back on it now and I say to myself, my God, we were living in the dark ages, because today my 19-year-old son can build a business overnight. And he has. He's built 3 or 4 businesses. So there's this sense of anything is possible and everything is free. So why not experiment? And that shift in risk reward is the most dramatic change I've seen, especially in thought leadership, where the commodity is what you know, it's knowledge. And trying to invest in a knowledge business was always a very difficult thing to do. Suddenly.
So the old barrier to entry of cost, time, energy, effort, technical expertise. I mean, even 10 years ago, building a website was not fun. Right now, those the things that were hurdles are no longer hurdles. So I would imagine that would mean that the essence, the ideas, and the actual thought leadership, the bar is higher in your opinion, or how would you answer that?
I think we're going through a transitionary period here. Call it the sort of the translational gap is the term that I often use. And the gap is we're moving from a time when there was a very steep barrier to entry. And frankly, you had to have a pedigree, you had to have the right education, you had to have all the right things in your resume in order to be a thought leader. Suddenly today, anyone who can gather a following, who can create some degree of influence, becomes a thought leader. And that creates noise. So the translational gap is trying to create filters that get through the noise and see the signal. And we're not quite there yet. So anyone who wants to be a thought leader can be a self-professed thought leader. And that creates a lot of, what we call fake news and falsehoods and truthies and all these things that may not necessarily be worth following, but nonetheless can create influence and can create a bit of a tribe. That's a risk factor, and we haven't quite figured that out yet.
Yeah. So let me look at that in a slightly different way, Tom, right? So the noise and the signal, it used to be that we lived in a world up until quite recently, right? Not all that long ago, of scarcity of information, right? Whoever had access to the information won. And it was, whatever you got. I mean, you mentioned starting a business and the amount of research it took, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're living in an age of, I don't want to say too much information, but the value is not in necessarily getting, the value isn't that the information isn't there. The value is in the filtering, right?
Yes.
So good thought leadership is someone that's bringing me something that's filtered and thoughtful and adding to the conversation, not more noise. Because my time is probably the most valuable resource I have, and I don't want to waste it watching or consuming content that's thoughtless.
True, but I would bet that you do, as do I, as do most people. The nature of how we do research, the nature of how we live day to day, is that we are derailed continuously by that noise. And look, some of that noise, as is the case with serendipity, for the most part, leads us to places that we wouldn't have wanted to go or thought to go on our own. So there is some benefit, some value to that serendipity. The level of information goes up and the opportunities to find things of value also increases, right? So this era of abundance, which is what we've been calling it as of late, definitely does have benefits. However, the question now becomes very simply, how do you mine those benefits and how do you create value from them? And look, in my mind, it's simple. What we've done by increasing the noise level is we've increased the degree to which the human connection is important. So what's the most valuable aspect of a human connection? Trust. So what you have to focus on is, how do I build trust? How do I maintain trust? How do I avoid at all costs breaking trust? And what we've seen with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica is that trust applies to every organization, no matter how small, how large. Once you lose that, it is very difficult to rebuild. And from a thought leader standpoint, that's your currency. Your currency is how trustworthy am I, is what I'm saying, is the accuracy and the integrity of my predictions, and that becomes very transparent. So look, I do believe that filtering is actually getting in some ways easier for those who have grown up in that modality. So my son, excellent filter, and he can tell you whether someone is genuine or not online in a heartbeat. For me, it's a little more difficult. So it's not that the filters don't exist, but we have to build them both culturally as well as technically. There's a human aspect to this that goes beyond just the technology.
Yeah, no, well said. So let me sort of ask you, give us the picture of sort of Delphi and your business. What are the overview? What are the ways that you are monetizing your ideas and your content? And where are you placing your bets for, let's say, the next 2 years in terms of modalities and such? And it could either be from a marketing perspective or product perspective. What are you doing that's cool and new and innovative to get the message out?
So let me approach that from a very broad perspective first, and then we can sort of narrow it down. I've got a new book coming out called Revealing the Invisible, coming out in June. And as part of the book, I did some research on a fellow who few have heard about. His name was Karl Popper, one of the truly great philosophers of the last century. And one of Popper's great insights was that we're moving from a period of what he called clock-based problems, solvable problems. Think of putting man on the moon and returning him back to home, back to Earth again. It was solvable. It required math. It was complex, but it was a solvable, finite problem. Once Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, we'd achieved the goal. Popper says we're moving from that kind of clock problem to what he calls cloud problems. Cloud problems are not solvable. They're continuously changing. They don't stand still long enough. There is no finish line. It's a continuum of effort and progress and learning and evolution. So when I look at thought leadership businesses, I look at Delphi and how we're going to evolve, in large part, it's helping people deal with this perpetual uncertainty. We're not dealing with solvable issues where you can pick a product or a technology, and as a result of that product or technology, rest on your decision for the next 10 years. At best, you might be able to rest on it for 6 months or 8 months or 9 months. So it's a continuum of learning that, frankly, terrifies a lot of people. When I look at folks my age and my demographic, 50s or 60s, they don't want to relearn because it's uncomfortable. When I look at kids, what I notice is that they've accepted the fact that they can never rest on what they've learned. They constantly have to relearn. So a thought leadership practice becomes a practice that is helping organizations to continuously move through that period of discomfort, learn, apply, learn, apply, learn, apply, over and over and over again. And that sounds simple, but you know what? In practice, it is absolutely one of the most significant cultural advantages an organization can have if it's competing in today's marketplace. So I think in essence, thought leadership has changed in many ways, from addressing very solvable, finite problems to unsolvable, constantly evolving, constantly changing problems.
Well, and if you're one of the common businesses for thought leaders is consulting, which is ultimately a problem-solving business. So if you can't solve a problem and you're in the problem-solving business, or solving, maybe I should better said might be problem-solving is no longer binary or static. It's dynamic and ever going. I guess from that perspective, it's more of an opportunity, because if the problem is never solved or always needs revisiting or new thinking, etc., that's opportunity.
Yes, so and I'm glad you put it that way, because here's where I was going with it, and you really summarized it wonderfully. The opportunity is that as a consultant, you are constantly required to provide external insight of whatever the existential threat is. So let me not get too wordy on this, but it's an important point. As a consultant, and I've trained hundreds of consultants over the years at Delphi Group. You would go in, identify the problem, as you said, solve it, get the paycheck, and be done with it at that point, right? So it was a finite engagement. Your objective was to solve the problem.
Well, and you had a framework based on the perspective of Delphi and the expertise, and here's our models and methodologies and framework, and here's how we look at the world, right?
Exactly, precisely. Now imagine that those methodologies are constantly changing, that the framework is perpetually in flux. The onus on the consultant now, and this is the key. I can't stress this enough, is to be that existential lens. Help me
Got it.
understand how the world is constantly changing and provide insight after insight after insight. And let me tell you, that is a tiring endeavor because one insight is not enough. Two insights are not enough. Every time you meet with the client, you have to provide additional insight as to what these threats are. Now, why can't the client see it? This is the traditional consulting model because they are engrossed in the
Yep.
box. They're
Yep.
part of the problem. They're constrained by the same constraints day in, day out. They can't see that existential threat. As a consultant, your role is to constantly bring insight from the outside into the organization. And the outside is changing so radically, so dramatically, so consistently that the value of that is only increasing. That, to me, is an incredibly opportune, target rich sort of marketplace.
But the bar would be higher, Tom, right? So it used to be, based on what you're saying, I get it. Is the traditional consulting methodology is here is our model, right? Here's the Six
Right.
Sigma model, here's the whatever model, the leadership model, etc. And the consultant firm sees the world through that lens, and they go into
That's
the
right.
client organization, look at the gap, and try to align it to fit into the lens of that consultancy, which is fairly static, right? You're not revising your models on a frequent basis. You might have a tweak or this, that, and the other thing. What you're saying now is the bar is higher because that model and methodology and framework, you need to question and push back on it more frequently.
Much higher. In
Yeah.
fact, this is a wonderful conversation because you're taking me back to a meeting I had with Jim Champy, co-author of Reengineering the Organization. Has become a good friend and mentor over the years. But probably 20 years ago, I had a meeting with him, and I was trying to explain to him my business model. At the time, he was doing some acquisitions,
Mm-hmm.
and he was the first person to say to me, "You know what? You're not a consultant. What you guys do is thought leadership." And I thought, what a great title. What the heck does that mean? And I've learned that there's a distinction, right? Consulting is still valuable. There are areas, financial models, where consulting must be precise and still focuses on the clock problems.
Yes.
However,
Yes.
from a surface, think about it from a surface area analogy. The surface area of the cloud problems is increasing much faster than that of the clock problems. That's why we need more thought leadership, and it is a distinct type of consulting, with a much higher bar that requires, frankly, a rather passionate and pathologic personality type.
Yep.
You need someone who truly is obsessed with learning and cannot stop him or herself.
So let me pivot this for a moment, Tom, from sort of this high level strategic conversation, which I love because that's sort of where I spend most of my time. But let's drill this down. So let's be really tactical now. You've got the book coming out. Uh, Obviously, the book is not going to be the primary moneymaker. It might be the driver of the introduction of this concepts to the world. But give me the productization, for lack of a better term, plan strategy or monetization strategy behind it. So someone gets the book, you can do a bunch of marketing, you've got a reputation, you've written a bunch of books. What are the services and offerings and such that are basically derivatives of the thinking that are codified in the book that you envision putting out there? And what does that look like? And how have you developed that?
So let me talk briefly about the direction that the book is taking us in, because that's a cornerstone of the answer. So the book is really about the shift towards behavioral computing. We want to capture behaviors. We see this with Facebook
Mm-hmm.
and Cambridge Analytica on sort of the negative side, right? That's the dark side of capturing behavior. But we're also seeing the upside of capturing behavior, and that we're starting to solve problems and create communities instantaneously that can address big challenges on a
Yep.
global scale. So we need that behavioral computing to be able to effectively evolve and survive and thrive going forward. So that's the point of the book. Now, how do you translate that? How do you monetize that? Look, there's three ways, very specific ways that I've seen. These apply across the board. This is not just Delphi
Yep.
and revealing the invisible. This is any thought leadership practice. Number one, you really have to balance the threat with the opportunity. I think all too often we talk about the threat, we get obsessed with it, the downside, the dark side of technology, and yet we limit our ability to see the upside. So we talk about how unemployment is going to radically disrupt our society. That conversation has never panned out. We've always found new ways to employ people. So the first thing you have to do as a thought leadership is identify those areas of opportunity where there's growth and there's new value to be created, and in identifying them, actually provide some mechanism by which an organization can capture those opportunities. And let me make this very tactical. I've got a large bank I'm working with here in the Northeast. Banks are not known for being very innovative, but they brought me in and they said, look, here's our problem. Our problem is that our board of directors and our executive management are very forward thinking, very visionary, very innovative, but our management is not. How can you help us?
So this is perfect because let me just pause you there for a second.
Sure.
Times, and here is the gap, and here is where magic is, right? So a great thought leader such as yourself, such as many, can have that conversation with the senior leader about the strategic piece, about what they're struggling with,
Yes.
about being creative, whatever. Then they say to that thought leader, but what the problem that we really need to solve is they, whoever they is, leadership, management, whatever, the 5, 10, 15, 20,000 people in our organization, how do you get them to do it? And then oftentimes the thought leader has two paths to go by. Hey, geez, I guess we can sell them a bunch of books or bring me in to speak. That's the wrong answer. Or B, here's the scalable digital whatever solution that I've got
Yes.
that pushes that answer to the question that the business leader had out to the masses cost effectively. So go there with me for a minute. So that leader at the bank says to you, yeah, Tom, we want our people to be more creative and innovative, et cetera. What are you pulling out of your briefcase to say, have I got what you need?
So what we've actually become more adept at doing is building tools that will help organizations develop their own competency in addressing scenarios that have high levels of uncertainty. So we've got specific tools that will go in, work with management on a regular basis to create a self-sufficiency, a capability to build a muscle, if you will, an organizational muscle that is much more adept and comfortable with in dealing with scenarios that involve high levels of uncertainty. So
Yep.
there are, and by the way, back to methodologies, there are methodologies that don't have extraordinarily tight, rigid frameworks that can be used in scenario-based planning. So we focused a lot on scenario-based planning tools that specifically address high levels of uncertainty, contextual uncertainty in a marketplace.
And I would imagine, Tom, and I'd like your thoughts on this. The typical speaker thought leader model is someone grabs their book and go, oh, that guy Tom, pretty interesting. What could we do? Oh, we can bring him in here to keynote our annual whatever, and they pay you some money to keynote, and that's all fine and dandy. But then you get to the crux of the issue, and then you're sort of ahead of the pack here, where you actually have the tools to solve the issue. Talk, and you don't have to get specific here in generalities around the benefit of that to you, right? So you get, keynote's a day's pay, and it's a good day's pay or whatever. What is the value of getting your tool deployed at scale in an enterprise to you?
The biggest value, and this might surprise you and a lot of the folks that are listening in on this, the biggest value of that is the learning that happens at ground zero. So as a result of deploying the tool, of working face-to-face, shoulder-to-shoulder with these folks, you begin to not just help them create value, but you create value for yourself because that learning, that experience translates into the next iteration of that tool. So going back to what I said earlier about how these are cloud problems. They're constantly evolving.
Yep.
The evolution
Yep.
happens in the trenches. That's where the DNA gets mutated. That's where the new species of the methodology evolves. And what's critical here is that you don't get so attached to the methodology that you make a religion out of it. You allow the
Right.
marketplace to consistently challenge, reshape, and reconstitute that methodology. And that's the key. And it's so hard for us to do that as human beings. We get accustomed to something. It becomes your child.
Yep.
It looks great. You love it. You adore it. You get used to applying it. It becomes second nature. The last thing you want to do
Sure. Sure.
is reinvent it. But that's the key ultimately to sustaining a thought leadership practice is reinventing.
That's awesome. So let me ask you this then. In your book, there's lots of problems that it addresses, right? And lots of potential solutions. What is the process that you go through or your organization goes through to say, aha, here's 5 tools that we should invest in because this is what the client needs? How do you decide what to do? And then, the flip of that is edit out what not to create. Because it's, some people get inundated with, oh my God, there's so many things I can pull from this book. But what are the 3 to 5 things that are the most valuable to the marketplace? How do you answer that question?
So you're asking 2 questions. Let me address them sort of in sequence. The first
Sure.
question is how do you arrive at what goes into the book to begin with? And that's a very simple answer. It is obsessive listening, unfiltered listening, truly objective listening to your marketplace. What's important
Yeah.
to them? What problems are they trying to solve? Which of their problems are unsolvable? And how can you help them better understand the context of those problems and how to address them? So this sounds cliche, but it's so darn true.
That's brilliant. And it's also the opposite of way too many folks work. Too many folks have this vision of I'm in author mode.
Yes,
So I'll go and get a cabin on the lake for July and sit there and, smoke a pipe in a tweed jacket and be alone with my thoughts. That's the worst thing that you can do, quite frankly,
it is
unless
not.
you're writing a novel.
It's the worst thing that you can do, but it also it's artificial. It's antiseptic. It's
Yep.
sterile. I tell folks, if you want to write a book, be prepared to throw away 2/3 of what you write, and the last third will be that third that didn't come out of you initially. It came from somewhere else. What you wrote triggered something else, or a thought, or an observation, and that's what ends up in the book. So that the answer to your first question is you allow the marketplace to write it for you.
Got it.
And you
Okay.
become detached from your own thought leadership so that you can throw away those things that you thought were important in favor of those that truly are.
So get over yourself and listen loudly.
I love it. Get over yourself and listen loudly. So I'm going to co-opt that. I love that.
I smell a book title. There we go.
The second answer, the second question, if you will, if I can be so presumptuous as to put the question in your mouth, is so now what you've got the book, you're done, you're up there giving the keynote. What happens next? How do you take this and actually provide it in a delivery modality? And the answer here is, once again, don't get so stuck on what you think is the right way to apply those ideas to an organization. Because what fascinates me, Peter, and this never ceases to amaze me, people will read my book and they'll read into it something entirely different than what I had intended. And you can be pissed off at that, right? And say, my God, that's not at all what I intended. Or you can say, you know what? That's a much more fascinating way to look at what I'd written than what was in my head when I wrote it.
Right.
So I allow people to take the book and use it as sort of an instigator of
Hmm.
their own thoughts, and then listen very carefully to how they're applying these ideas, and then follow up on their interpretation. Because that to me is exciting, right? How did I write something that triggered a completely different thought than what was in my mind when I wrote it?
So are you waiting for the reaction from the book
Yes,
to stimulate or solidify the sort of the tool building, if you will?
absolutely. Because you know what? The market is much smarter than either one of us ever can be.
Yeah, no, and we're a big believer in co-creation and rolling up our sleeves, and I think we talk more clients out of developing their brilliant idea in terms of a training series or whatever, unless there's client involvement. Because unless the
Got it.
only vote that matters is the vote of the checkbook of the corporate client,
That's
and
right.
quite frankly, people separate product development from sales, and that's really silly. It's the
Yes.
sales, the marketing, the co-creation, the creativity, getting folks that are leaning in and have a respect for your work and content. They want to help, right? And they're going to have an emotional connection to it. Nobody ever put the neighbor's kid's bad macaroni drawing on their own fridge, right? So getting them in the R&D lab with you. And by the way, back to your comments earlier on the tools and stuff, it's pretty cheap and inexpensive, and the risk is much lower now to do rapid prototyping and minimum viable product, particularly with content-based solutions. We're not going to the moon with these things. So video assessment, you're not throwing away millions of dollars on a lark here. You can manage your risk effectively. You can experiment. You can throw stuff out there. So I love that. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. I think it comes down to less is more. And the
Yeah.
hardest thing to convince any consultant of is that less of them is actually going to create more value for the client. It's a tough, and you know what? We're not going to cover all that in a few minutes, here.
Yeah. No.
But I would caution people to think about that philosophy when they deliver any service. Less is more, because what that means is that you're allowing the client to interpret it in a way that they understand, because they do understand their problem better than you ever will.
And they'll tell you what they want solved. So let me, as we start to get to the wrap up phase here, Tom. Out there today is Tom minus 15, 20 years, right? So maybe they're at book 1 or 2 or 3. What would you tell that person? What would and let's give some assumptions. They're smart. This isn't, they've put in the work. They've listened loudly. They're out there. What advice would you give sort of the young you, if you will?
So I've thought about that often, and the advice I would give the young me would not be taken by the young me.
Well, isn't that always the
Right, but that's sort of the foundation of this question is what would you tell a younger you that would reshape my younger me would never listen to my older me. My younger me would say, "Get the hell on with your life. Stop giving me advice. Obviously, it worked out just fine because you're there and I'm here." But I would nonetheless, as we do with our kids, I would nonetheless make the effort. And I think that I would sum it up. I'd say, look, be a little less arrogant and a little more open to listening to others' opinions and ideas, because yours are not necessarily the greatest or the best. Now that said, the younger me would say with an abundance of arrogance, get out of my face. I know exactly what I'm doing. I've got a plan, and you're not going to stand in my way.
So there we have it, folks. An argument between Tom today and Tom circa 1993 or something.
Exactly.
Great. Well, this has been great. Where can folks reach you? How do they reach you? And why should they reach you?
Well, the where is pretty simple. If you spell Koulopoulos any which way and Google me, you will come up with more than enough references. My email is tk@delphigroup.com, and I'm glad to communicate with people directly. The new book is called Revealing the Invisible. It's a wonderful look at how behavioral computing is going to change so much of the way we live our lives and the way that we work our society, our political organizations. And the why is because I love to engage with people on things that are interesting and important. For me, life is about learning, and I never want to end that journey. And if I can drag a few people along in that process, it's just a pleasure to do it.
Well said. Well, I can't thank you enough. I'm going to go back and listen to this because this went from sort of the philosophical to the tactical, from the sort of big picture to the pragmatic pretty quickly, from someone that's been there, done that, and is in the trenches every day doing some great stuff. So I appreciate your time, and thank you so much for joining us today, Tom.
Peter, thank you. It's my pleasure.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.